We have three change agents, three interrupters today. We're hoping to learn from each. First is one of our very own, Dr. Maria Hyler. Maria Hyler serves as the director of the Learning Policy Institute in their Washington, D.C. office. She directs the Educator Preparation Laboratory in partnership with Bank Street Graduate School of Education. The EdPrep Lab is a center on teacher and learning preparation for deeper learning and equity, working to transform educator preparation through the alignment of research, practice, and policy. She's a theory to practice person. She puts them together. Maria is a former teacher right here in Belmont, California. She got her PhD in curriculum and instruction from our program here at Stanford, worked as a professor at the University of Maryland, and is now leading the change through policy and practice and training. Welcome, Maria. Dr. June Gordon gave me a book 20 years ago. She has no idea that happened. And the book was titled The Color of Teaching. Dr. Gordon's research focuses on the impediments students face in accessing education in urban schools, both in the United States and internationally. She has published 4 books and numerous chapters and articles related to the historical, economic, political, cultural, and social context of schooling and how this context differentially affects attitudes towards education, as well as attitudes about who can be transported across time and space. Her book, The Color of Teaching, does something important. It is based on 114 interviews of teachers of color across urban school districts and explores what are the reasons that students of color enter the field of teaching, why do they stay, and why do they leave? So welcome, Dr. Gordon. And our final panel member is Randal Seriguchi. Randal Seriguchi competes with the school to prison pipeline. As the executive director for the Urban Education Academy, he is supporting the early leg of a parallel pipeline to success for remaining African-American boys in the city of San Francisco. Through Saturday school programming, STEM experiences, in-school mentorship, and strong community engagement, the Urban Education Academy is a reliable partner in elementary school spaces. He's a leading advocate for the recruitment of men of color into the classroom. Prior to moving to San Francisco, Randal spent 5 years working to lift up social justice through education in the DC and California areas. He's an active member of the New York State Bar Association and holds a Juris Doctorate degree from the American University Washington College of Law and received his Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Michigan. Welcome, Randal. All right, so our panel today is designed to talk about at 3 levels. We have people who do policy work, we have people who do research, and people who are working to intervene in that space. So we hope to talk about all of these things together, but we really want them to have a conversation about what and why and how we might do something about these challenges. So the very first thing we want to talk about is a simple question, and that question is, why is it important that we have teachers of color in the classroom? We are operating on that assumption. Let's talk about that first. Dr. Hyler?
Sure thing. And, you know, you talk about the strands of research, policy, and practice, and they really are 3 strands that need to be aligned and really support one another and inform one another to be able to make that change you're talking about. So the research shows that teachers of color are critical for a number of reasons. First, we know that teachers of color and for students of color in particular have shown signs of increased scores on standardized tests in mathematics and English. They have shown not only academic successes, but social emotional, such as reduced levels of absenteeism, reduced levels of referrals and discipline, and greater feeling of belonging in schools. Also, we know that teachers of color are often in the schools that serve the most students of color. And so you are finding that these schools are hard to staff generally. So they feel a need of just staffing schools that often have great levels of turnover. And we know that teachers of color not only benefit students of color, but research shows that they benefit white students as well, because all students feel cared about and academically challenged by teachers of color. And in a global society, all students need to see teachers of color for just learning how to engage and interact with people who are different from you. And it's important that we continue to support teachers of color for those reasons, in addition to many others. So I'm sure Randy and June also have other perspectives to add to that.
I think it's really important to realize that teachers of color should not just be role models for students who are from the same background that they're from. It's really essential that white kids see professionals, people who've gone to college, who've chosen teaching, a career that cares about children, that believes that children can succeed. And the more variation that kids in general can see in terms of who represents society, and for those teachers to give their historical grounding in terms of what history really is all about, their history, but also their perspective on history in general. And I think that can come very strongly or more strongly from people who have either been a part of communities of color, who understand what's going on, or the individuals themselves. But I also want to say that from my research, race match teaching did not cut it. Some students basically said that they felt that from their point of view, if they had a teacher who was from the same background as they were, they felt that that teacher would cut them, in some cases, more slack, in some cases, less slack. And in some cases, the teachers of color who I interviewed said that they felt that it was very difficult to teach students from diverse backgrounds other than their own. So we can't just claim teachers of color, from whatever background that might mean for you, can teach kids of color from whatever background that means. That isn't just a person of color versus the kids who represent many, many cultures.
I agree. A lot of the research that shows the gains are specifically for Black teachers and Black students.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I would chime in. Our work with Urban Ed Academy is focused mainly on Black male teachers, specifically Black male teachers entering into elementary classrooms. And so the only +1 to everything that you all said. And so I would just drill down a little bit more on the earlier side of it. There are a couple of studies that show the impact that a Black male teacher can have, specifically on Black children, Black boys, even more acutely when you have a Black man in front of a Black boy before 6th grade. One study suggests that if you have one teacher before that age, you get 13% bump in college enrollment probability. If you get 2 before then, it jumps up to 32%. And then there's another study that shows the impact at the high school level. If you have a Black man in front of a Black boy before 6th grade, the likelihood of dropping out of high school decreases by 39%. And all of this is, of course, school is important. Academics are important. Learning is important. All of that, though, is irrespective of academic gains. It's just about the exposure. It's just about that integration of culture and introduction of a role model that you can see yourself in. Our mantra is you can't be what you can't see. Representation matters. And if it matters anywhere, it certainly matters in our elementary schools.
So I want to ask us to talk about some of the research, some of the reasonings for why people choose a profession and not. Dr. Gordon, you have conducted research. Your book talks about this. Can you share some of your findings? What are some of the reasons why?
You have that slide?
We certainly do. Let's see if we can find it.
Did I not send you something, Brian?
I believe.
Okay, go to the list. Okay, no, go to the list of reasons, first of all.
Am I on the wrong page?
Yeah, you're on the wrong page. Keep going back. Okay, there's one that has the reasons why students of color are not going to the field of teaching. Well, anyway.
All right, let's go.
Here are some of the quotes based on that. So you can read these yourself. I'm not going to have to do that for you. And you have to understand the interviews were done with African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and Asian Americans. Okay. Was that the only one you have? Or is there another?
I believe so. We're rolling with this.
We're rolling. Okay. All right. I think the biggest thing that seldom gets brought up is that if kids have had negative experiences in school, kids of color, whatever, they're not likely to see teaching as something they want to go into. And if they're not prepared and strong enough in their subject matter that they think they want to go into, if they get that far, if they, think about, okay, I want to be a teacher, but am I good enough to teach history? Am I good enough to teach math? If you don't feel grounded enough, you are not going to go out there and perform in front of a classroom and try to, in a sense, put it across to somebody else because you're not grounded enough. So the actual education of kids of color when they're in those elementary school, middle school, and high school years is essential. But is that happening? And that's sort of like where we need to break the cycle. If you don't have enough teachers who are prepared to teach kids of color, understanding that range of what that word means, then how in the world are these kids going to feel comfortable in a classroom to do well themselves so that they then can even consider college, because you can't become a teacher without college. And how many kids of color are going into college and then selecting teaching? So that's one part. The other thing that was really interesting that kept coming up, particularly for Black males, that's a feminine profession.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I go into a profession that's mostly white women in particular, right? And we all know that's the truth. And the men of color that I did interview, who were African American, basically kept saying, I have been called gay, I have been called lots of names, some of them I won't even repeat, because I've wanted to become a teacher. It's a feminine field. I'm not going to go there. That was one slice of it. But the other is how many teachers of color are presumed that they're going to teach in their community, particularly Black teachers. Well, if you're a Black teacher, you're going to be put into a Black school because you understand those kids better. Oh my God, I can't tell you how many African American teachers I interviewed. And out of the 114, 81 were African American, said, I was not prepared to teach in these schools. I'm from the South where teachers were respected, or I'm not going to teach in a Cincinnati school. I'll teach in a suburban school. Or the other side was, why do you always expect me as a person of color to be willing to go into an under-resourced urban school when white teachers get to choose where they want to go to? So what is this that's going on? Why are we making certain assumptions that the labor of working in an under-resourced urban school is going to go on the shoulders of particularly African American or Latino teachers? The Native American situation, Asian Americans, it's different. That's why the rubric of teachers of color or people of color it doesn't cut it at a certain point. I had, for Asian Americans, one person said to me, I'm Japanese American. What in the hell do I have in common with a kid from Cambodia? But we're all Asians. There is no place such as Asia. There is no country called Asia. And yet we do that. And obviously there are class issues in the Black community, not to mention where you grew up, what attitude you have towards your own background. Latino community is very, very fractured, clearly all the way from whether you grew up in Argentina or if you grew up Belmont, okay? Something closer.
I want to address something that you're saying, because it piggybacks right on the research and the policy pieces, is that the preparation is so key, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just about how, if you don't feel like you're prepared, it's the actual preparation itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So teachers of color are twice as likely to come into the field of teaching through alternative pathways. And while we can argue the variety of quality on alternative pathways, most times you can find that there's often key courses that are missing, or not a lot of student teaching. You don't have a strong mentor teacher over the course of a long period helping you to give you a vision of what that looks like. And that's why you get all teachers, teachers of students of color as well, saying, I'm not prepared to teach in schools, because during preparation, you have a framework and a way to learn about culturally sustaining and responsive teaching. And nobody is born with that. You have to learn how to understand your own positionality, because, race isn't a monolith. And, I'm a Black woman from New Jersey, and my experience is going to be different than the kids who I taught in Dorchester, Massachusetts, right? So I needed to have a framework and a way to understand my positionality and my students' positionality, even though they were Black as well. We had different experiences. And so I needed to learn and understand culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogies to be able to engage in productive pedagogies with students. And so if you get teachers of color coming into teaching on through alternative pathways, they're getting into classrooms and they're not properly equipped and prepared to teach at all, let alone the culturally sustaining, sometimes not even their subject matter. And that causes the turnover for teachers of color to be twice as high as the white counterparts. So preparation is a key policy piece as well, and looking at how to ensure that teacher preparation is affordable and sustainable and available for teachers of color in particular.
Before I turn over to Randy, which is one of the main reason that most teachers gave, ended up, was that teachers of color do not recommend teaching to their students or to their children or friends. No encouragement, no recommendation.
Which is why I think, kind of going back to the representation piece, I think it's almost it's implicit, right? Like if we've talked to a bunch of folks, namely the fellows that we try to attract here, and most often they don't have any experience with a Black male teacher. But if we ask them who was your favorite teacher, it often was a teacher of color earlier on, and they got excited about the prospect of being able to serve, not necessarily teach, because they had somebody pouring into them. I want to kind of go back to something you were talking about, Dr. Hyler, with the preparation. And I totally agree that there's debates around the level of quality that teacher candidates are receiving coming out of alternative spaces. But given that we're in a national teacher shortage and there's this emergency and urgency around getting new talent into the profession, I want to just sidebar the conversation on the alternative stuff. And I wanted to get you all's perspective on a statistic that's slightly dated. I would love to see an update on it, but are you familiar with Dr. Ivory Tolson from Howard? There was research from 2010 that he cited around the percentage of all teachers, but specifically Black men, that are in teacher preparation programs but don't matriculate into actual teaching. And it was startling. It's like 23% actually elect to do it. And so I think to your point about the stigmas, we're finding that the leaks from pre-K all the way to bachelor's degree, and then even in the preparation programs, when we get there, you run into some stuff like this, where there are some real hard decisions that these men need to make, especially if they're going to become breadwinners, raise families. You have to talk eventually about the economics of teaching, regardless of where your heart is in the service. And I'll pause there because I think there's some maybe some other questions around like what interventions actually will work.
Yeah.
Let's stay there. Let's stay in intervention. So we're trying to plant the seed so you all can be the change agents and thinking critically about what to do. Randy, can you tell us like what is your intervention? How are you approaching this space? I think it's an important part of this discussion.
Absolutely. And so I think well, first, Urban Ed Academy is based in Bayview Hunters Point, San Francisco. And it started out as a Saturday school, matching Black men with Black boys on Saturdays. But when we look at Monday through Friday, less than 2% of all teachers nationally, certainly in San Francisco, are Black men. And so in order to attract them to this as an opportunity, we just kind of went bare bones and looked at, well, what is the greatest barrier to asking somebody to move to San Francisco if they're not already there and then elect to teach? It's housing in the Bay Area. And so in a finite resource place like the world, and specifically like America in the Bay Area, knowing we can't throw dollars in the income side of the balance sheet of life, the best thing we can do is start eliminating costs on the other side. And for us, it had to start with housing. And so it was an uphill battle, certainly convincing funders and supporters to subsidize grown men living in a place. But when you extrapolate out their impact and the economic benefit to a city with the long-term impacts that man can instill just with 4 years of presence, it was worth the bet. And so we had to get creative. I can talk a little bit more later about our social exchange theory and how we convince Black property owners to work with us as partners to house these men. But it started there. And then the cost of entering into the profession, the fees, tests, tuition is expensive and cost prohibitive for men who are likely coming in with debt if they just graduated from college. So we try to eliminate those as the primary costs and work with partners to get as many other ones eliminated as possible.
Other thoughts?
So I taught all the way back I taught in the Bay Area from 96 to 2000, dating myself. And I always had a second job as a teacher. I would audit driving schools. I don't know if you remember back in the day when you actually had to go to a driving school. I would audit and I'd go on the weekends with a clipboard and like check off to make sure the driving schools. And that's how I made enough money to like actually live on my own, because I had roommates for quite some time when I taught, and then I got my own place and I had a second job. And so that's real. I mean, that was in how many years ago, math. And so those incentives you're talking about are so key in terms of diversifying the educator workforce. And we have some good things that we're investing in terms of policy, such as grants and service scholarships, where either the cost of tuition is paid for upfront, or it's paid off after you've committed to 3 or 4 years of teaching in the field. Residencies are really a great way right now to provide comprehensive teacher preparation, where you're getting basically paid to learn how to teach, and that's how international countries are doing so much better than them. The cost of teacher preparation is free in other countries that are similar to the United States. And so when we think about the financial burden that teachers of color come into the teaching profession with, I think after 12 years, teachers of color have $43,000 more of debt than white teachers. That's a lot of additional debt that you have to then try to pay off when your salaries are not, meeting up to the cost of living in an area. So I love the idea of the housing mortgage repayment. There are places that are supporting mortgage repayment for teachers as well. At the end of that.
So let me apologize, because I'm going to present the counter argument,
Okay, go.
and I want you all to think about it. So here's
Both sides.
yeah, I don't even know, but here's a different position. Don't send me an email. So here's the
We hear
counter.
all the time that public school teachers are severely underpaid.
This guy.
It's a claim often made during teacher pay disputes, and not to mention a hot topic during presidential campaigns.
Can people see around
But
us?
where exactly do these claims come from? Are public school teachers truly underpaid? Each year, the Economic Policy Institute produces annual reports on public school teacher pay. Their report claims in 2018, teachers received salaries 21% below those of comparably educated and experienced workers in the private sector. This is the source that the media likes to use when covering teacher pay disputes. But there's a problem with this research. If we use EPI's same data and statistical techniques to figure out what other professions are paid, we would find that firefighters are overpaid by 25%, while massage therapists are underpaid by 10%, where the air traffic controllers are overpaid by 58%, and telemarketers are underpaid by 26%. Now, this doesn't make any sense. So why are we getting these results? Well, EPI's researchers compare teacher salaries to private sector workers with the same age and education. Now, this sounds reasonable, but this assumes that education is interchangeable, that a bachelor's degree in education has the same market value as a bachelor's in engineering, and a master's in education obtained online is worth the same as an MBA from a top college. If we go by this standard, public school teachers are more educated than 95% of the workforce, more than atmospheric scientists, software developers, and nearly all fields of engineering. So if teachers aren't paid the same as these occupations, the EPI claims they must be underpaid. But we know that not all students, colleges, and degrees are worth the same. In the real world, employees are paid not only for the number of years they sat in a classroom, but according to the supply of and demand for the skills they developed there, skills that obviously vary across occupations. Nurses, for instance, might not have as many years of formal education as teachers, but nursing demands both technical knowledge and enormous attention to detail. A simple mistake can risk a patient's life. You can't conclude that nurses are overpaid simply because they earn more than typical college graduates. The real problem isn't that teachers on average are underpaid.
So he sounded so patronizing, first of all, so patronizing. And, I would argue that students' lives are in the hands of teachers.
Yeah.
So the whole argument that you know, the lives are in the hands of nurses, yes, and as well as teachers. So, you know, thank you for sending the video ahead of time. I went down a rabbit hole. I was like, what is this AIE? And what is the agenda? And yes, there's always an agenda behind folks and their stances, because they call themselves a center-right organization, and they a lot of them served on Bush's administration. And so it's kind of like, what are you gaining by trying to argue that teachers are underpaid? And it was a very much of a market value business model kind of argument around teacher pay that just doesn't hold water in terms of percentages, because teachers in 38 states in the United States qualify for some form of government assistant if they're the head of a family of 4. So there is no reason why a professional in that situation should be qualifying for government assistance. What I will say that a couple things. You can't just focus on teacher salary as the way to improve recruitment and retention of teaching. There's other items that you'll get into, I'm sure, but I want to say that you need to focus on teacher pay in some way, and teacher salary and compensation, in order to really think about a profession and supporting teachers' professionalization. But you have to also remember, I think a lot of people say that we need to recruit a different type of teacher, and that we should recruit and understand that teachers are not going to stay in the profession. And that's true for some, and I would say even many, but there are teachers in communities that want to stay in their community. They would love to be a teacher for a lifetime, and we don't think about the pathways for them. And that's why the policy solution for that is to invest in grow your own programs, to think about programs that help assist teachers' aides or folks that are working in schools to become a teacher through different paid for pathways. And so when we think about how we can support teachers who want to stay in the field for a lifetime, those are the types of strategies that we have to focus on. Because in some communities, especially rural, a teacher salary is actually an advancement, social mobility for them, outside of the fact that in general, teachers' wages are, teachers are underpaid.
Mhm. I'm going to read you just 2 quotes that I don't think they're up there. So one is that, and this came up very frequently, particularly when I was doing research in Cincinnati, that views itself as the South, but also the East, is that teaching isn't viewed as a profession that is exciting and glamorous. Teaching isn't glamorous anymore. And where this came from, if you probe farther, was that when integration began, when segregation stopped in the South, basically, prior to that, teachers were viewed as the community leaders, particularly in the Black community, okay? So community leaders, teaching was one of the top jobs there. And people dressed for success. This came up over and over again. With integration, they felt that the quality of teachers, the kind of person who went into teaching, decreased. Along with that came status. But what was interesting is that they also talked about the way teachers dress, the kind of cars that teachers drive, the interpersonal reaction that teachers had with students on a one-to-one basis. Oh, just call me June, right? Rather than Miss Gordon, Dr. Gordon. That whole leveling experience, which much of the middle-class white community believed was a good thing to be on par with, let them know you're their friend, not their teacher. They felt that was a farce. Teachers hold power. Students know that. And when you start to play this game, it can be very confusing for kids. But one quote that came up, which is interesting, this is a quote, I don't think that money is a real issue. It's a myth. The union is working against us. By advocating for more income, they give a bad image to the profession. It's ironic. They say we are poorly paid to get more money, but then everybody thinks it's a low-paying job, which is just an interesting twist. And that was just one quote, but it's that idea. People talked about now we feel like we're just laborers, whereas before we had status, we had a position within the community, and now we're just one more worker? Leave that there.
Well, direct answer to the rebuttal of the video for sure is teachers are vastly underpaid. I just was doing a little math here just to make sure I wasn't crazy. But for the $60,000 here in the state of California, I took off 35% for taxes. Is that about right? 21 grand. You're down to $39,000 of discretionary income for 12 months, even though you're working 10 months. Still for 12 months. That's $3,200 per month you get to spend on your life, let alone your family's life, if you're leading a household of 4. And the rule of thumb I've heard, I know it's not science, but if your monthly income is supposed to be roughly 30% dedicated towards rent, that would leave you with $975 to spend on living here in the Bay Area. And I mean, from the South Bay up to San Francisco, now going deeper into the East Bay now too. I mean, you're looking at shacking up with 8 people to try to make ends meet. And I know that's not going to come into the equation of underpaid, but I think if we sort of make that term a little more elastic, we're not looking just at what you're affording with your money. It's like, what kind of quality of life are you getting? And so I think that's the first response that I thought of. The second is that to the market question, and I was just talking about this earlier today, where I guess higher salaries are justified because they're moving money in other ways. So an engineer is making $180,000 to $250,000 a year, depending on where they're working, because the product is global and all of this money, other money is being generated out of it. And I said something controversial in an earlier panel around we need to lean more into capitalism that way then to make this argument around the return on investment we're getting per teacher and what the expectation should be based on that investment of $60,000 a year. And if we're looking at a classroom size of 20 kids, 20 children who are going to, let's just call it what it is, be the future tax-paying base of any given city that we're at, the return on investment is ridiculous. If we do our jobs right, they're going to be the ones making that $180,000 to $250,000. And in the state of California, we did a little calculation. If you go total public school, pre-K through bachelor's degree, and then even through credentials, let's just call it that, going into teaching, the investment is somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000 in that person over the course of a 24-year span. And so if you can the multiplier effect of creating that in 20 other individual humans, to me, justifies that 60,000 should be 5x, right? Based on what we're expecting that to be. I think there are bigger questions around the sustainability of how long we would be able to pay somebody for that long. And I think there are probably questions I can't answer today around what the sweet spot looks like for longevity in this profession. Millennials and Gen Z work trends are showing us folks are not staying around long in jobs. And so if that's our future pipeline into teaching, I think there may be some adjustments we need to make, but factor in the bang for the buck we'd like to see in those 4 to call it 10 years of service. And yeah, I think it's a clean argument to make that we're not paying teachers nearly enough of what they deserve.
So I want to switch the conversation to ways that we might intervene. I know in Dr. Gordon, your work talks about different programs of intervention. Maria, you've talked about policy and practices across the country. And then Randall, you mentioned social exchange theory. I'd like each of you to talk about what might we do in this space to improve how we can diversify teachers of color.
Well, I'll just say 2 things. We have to improve the image of teachers. There has to be a certain degree of respect for people who go into the field of teaching. And that has to be transmitted to young people. The other thing is in teacher training, not just teacher training, but teacher training writ large. I was talking to Brian about this earlier. It's not a college of education problem or issue. It is a university. If you want to get, once they get into college, pray to God people go that far. Many do not, and there's nothing wrong with not going to college. But if you do, it is the university or the college's responsibility all sections of it, to be able to educate those kids in a way that if we know they're interested in teaching, they could do their essays, they could talk about how they would teach that subject matter to students. They could be identified as a teaching cohort, and they could move through like the first 2 years as a cohort, meaning like meeting once every 2 weeks or so as a cohort, but then doing their, whether it be math courses or humanities courses, writing their papers with focus on what would it be like to teach this particular thing to students. So the whole system, in a sense, takes responsibility. After those 2 years, if people want to opt out, they can. Because also in those first 2 years, they should be in a community or a school situation so they can see what goes on in schools in present time. They can decide this is not what I want to do. Because I think the main reason why teachers do not sustain is because they're prepared either super ideologically, oh, you're going to go out there and transform the world. Thank you very much. You're working within a system that is very rigid. You are not going to get a lot of room there to do things. The other side is they're not prepared for the reality of schools today. Mm-hmm. They might think they're going to walk into, I don't know, Poly High or something like that and teach those kids. Excuse me, try Hayward High. I mean, you really have to understand that kids are all over the map and you do not get to have the chance to choose where you teach and who you teach. So I think those two factors are really important.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Yeah.
Kids are all over the place at Poly High.
I
didn't want to say
it's still quite different.
I think that yes and no, because the general the general graduation rate for college for all students is 40%. So like you have to like start plugging the pipeline, and it's for students of color, it's like 30%. It's less. So you have to start plugging the pipeline early and thinking about moving folks into the teaching profession. So, and I don't, there are some colleges and universities that are doing a great job, and then there's others that are not doing a great job of exposing and exciting students for the teaching profession. One of the things that we didn't talk about, well, there's two things I want to talk about, is the leadership. So really focusing also on school leadership and principals, and largest factor for teachers of color for retention within schools is administrative support, as well as feeling a sense of autonomy. And those are things that principals and leaders in schools have the power to create environments where teachers are valued, they have input, there's site leadership, and that, if you have a leader, and most principals are white, that had strong preparation and understands culturally sustaining and responsive pedagogies, they can support teachers to do that work. So if you're a teacher of color with fewer teachers of color in your school, you can then have a common understanding of what good pedagogy looks like. And you need a leader who's going to stop the microaggressions against teachers of color, or even the racism that just is in schools. That you need a leader who's going to step in and step up. So really focusing on leadership and the preparation, the professional development of leaders is important. And then when we talk about systems, I think that we shouldn't only think about our K-12 system, but we should think about our policy systems as well. So we need to focus on the accreditation and licensure processes at the state level, and look at what are our standards at states, and what are the standards that we are measuring our teachers, or preparing our teachers to meet, and thinking about the science of learning and development, culturally sustaining and responsive pedagogies, and making sure that the standards that we have and the licensure processes that we have to get into the profession make sense for our teachers.
So building on that, I think one larger dynamic that we've been navigating and exploring as an organization, as it relates specifically to recruiting Black men into the profession, is that there's kind of this fine line between recruitment and retention as themes for us to pursue and to build, creative solutions. You all are familiar with A through G requirements here? Abysmal rates for Black graduates who are effectively just being socially promoted when they can't even apply to their own public university systems. But beyond losing that, we are of the mind that, regardless of what happens once the folks get there, what does the interest look like on the front end? How do you gin that up in someone who, one, either hasn't thought about teaching at all, or to one of the other quotes you have there, Dr. Gordon, around having a negative experience? How do you get somebody to step outside of the traumas that they may have had in a system where they know, especially if they are from the inner city, they know what these schools are, and yet we're asking them to run into burning buildings. And so what we had thought about was, in the most ideal of worlds, you got to create some sort of draft. You have to be able to create conditions for folks to be able to opt in, not from a mandatory perspective, but from a calling, because we're not going to be able to rely on schools of education to supply what we need. We're going to have talent lateral in from other places. And I think we're already in limited supply for Black male college graduates in the country, period. If you're a stellar student, you're likely going to a different profession. That's just what the numbers are telling us. And so the best comparison we had was looking at the military. And the military has a phenomenal benefits package that they roll out to high school graduates. You don't even need to go to college to get a better pay outcome as an 18-year-old than a 24-year-old gets after 6 years of school, debt, stress, etc. And so how did the U.S. military convince people of color, despite all of the other systemic racism things happening? How do you convince them to potentially go die? Well, you take care of them. You take care of their entire life. And that doesn't just involve housing. When you live on a military base, you don't pay taxes to a certain degree, right? You get health benefits that are superior based on where you are. You maybe get some agency. It's not just left up to chance that you're going to be placed in some other school. You get to kind of get a choice. And so, without getting into the litany of minor line items, I think that add up and compound to what the perfect benefits or perfect recruitment package looks like. I think we have to get creative with other strategies, and we have to not be fearful of the fact that it's going to cost us more money. I know we have a different conversation around where that money's coming from. But that's kind of where we started our thinking and started some of the experimentation in what we were doing. But maybe coming fast forwarding now, or I'm sorry, coming back to specifically what we're saying when we go to these HBCUs that we visit. And we have a network of about 25 of them, most in the South and in the East Coast. And almost every single Black man we talk to on these campuses and step up to them and want to show them what we're doing, they come to the table or we're presenting in a class, whatever it is. We've had a ridiculous failure rate when we open up with, we want you to come teach. It doesn't work. Just saying that. Hopefully it's not controversial. But the numbers bear that out. And immediately they're turned off. And they maybe tell us about an experience they had at the YMCA or Boys and Girls Club or, whatever. If they're in college, which, all these guys are, they did okay. Something went well for them. But teaching is off limits because they have all these stigmas and other things. But if you talk to them as a Black person, as a future Black leader who's had it paid forward for them, and you're presenting an opportunity to serve the community and lift as you climb, then the inquiry becomes, how can I do that? And so I think, to the point you were making, Dr. Gordon, education certainly exists outside of the four walls of the classroom. And we have to be honest about that. We ask schools and the professionals in them to do a whole lot. And so let's just be honest and upfront about what kind of lift we're talking about. But if it's done in service to uplifting the Black community, you're going to get more Black men to say yes. And then we can navigate on the back end of how to make that easy and comfortable for folk that are unfamiliar.
And how to prepare them, because we have to be careful, because a lot of the Army recruitment stuff is exploitive, right?
Yes.
There's things to learn there. Like there's things to learn about recruitment for the other pathways as well. But we do have to remember. So I appreciate you started there, but then you moved on.
I had to move on. There was a big asterisk.
Randy, I think you're too young to know about the Teacher Corps. Do you know about the Teacher Corps?
I don't know about the Teacher Corps.
Can we learn about the Teacher Corps? Tell us about the Teacher Corps.
Tell us about the Teacher Corps.
Well, it happened parallel to the Peace Corps. Go do some homework on that.
Victoria?
Well, I mean,
Oh,
It was
yeah.
very successful.
that's the argument for a lot of the alternate pathways, and that's why
Yep.
it's become very popular to diversify the educator workforce, and so like everybody's jumping on that, and then what you find is that the capitalism, you get a lot of programs where you think you're going to be paid to learn how to teach, and then you're not, and then you're put in classrooms, and it's like a setup for failure. So then now you have teachers of color going in and fulfilling the stereotype of not being successful in classroom, but it's not. It's because they weren't prepared to teach, and so that's something that really
Yeah.
enrages me, is because it's like you have this like this draw into teaching, and then you don't deliver because you, meaning the program that has like enticed them in, they don't deliver because they haven't been prepared, and so now you set up for failure for a idealistic person as well as for the students that are in their classroom. And this is not talking about your program whatsoever, but I'm just saying, like, it's gotten very popular to talk about diversifying, and so now you see these pop-up programs that are getting in quick into the classroom, and it's just exploitive in my eyes.
So I want to hear from you, and then we have one set of questions before we go to
Okay.
Q&A.
This is, in some sense, response to you, but honestly, this person did not know he was going to be talking to you. Okay.
Okay.
So, all right. So this is a quote from an African-American male, about 45 years of age, Cincinnati. It says, quote, "Black males set their vision so high. We project higher," he's speaking of himself, "we project higher than where we feel comfortable, rather than take a job within our comfort zone. Then we don't take the jobs in between and end up with lower level jobs that don't provide good self-esteem."
So is he saying teachers a lower level job?
Yeah.
I'm a little confused. Is that what he's saying?
No, he's saying that this is sort of one of the comments that came out. Why would Black men go into teaching when they can become doctors or lawyers or engineers or CEOs? Right? I mean, that kind of stuff came up a lot.
Mhm.
Well, that's true if you're maybe third generation college educated, you're middle class, you've got parents who are really pushing, but that doesn't apply to everybody. So this person's responding to that kind of thing, where we we think we can do something, but because of that, and because other people are pushing us to go high, we don't think about teaching. We think about status, okay? And teaching does not have status. And unless it has status, the other thing came up, the gold chain theory came up over and over again. And people said, I don't subscribe to the gold chain theory, meaning you gotta look it, right? You gotta look the part in order to have status. Well, that's not happening among most teachers. So his view was that, therefore, they miss out on these in-between jobs and end up doing jobs that are not professional, or, as he says, lower level.
So I'm going to ask for quick recommendations. We have people here in teacher education. We have researchers in the room. For each of you, what would you recommend we do in our teacher education program? Our third category, recruitment. What would you recommend we do in recruitment? So what would you recommend we do in our research? What would you recommend we do in our teacher education program? And what would you recommend in our recruitment strategies? And then we'll go to Q&A to close.
What was that again?
I just made it up. I don't know if I can do it again. What would you recommend for our teacher education program, how we approach things? What would you recommend for our research that we're doing here, and then our recruitment? So one of those, I don't need you to talk about each, but if each of you could talk about one of those categories, I'd love to hear your opinion.
Yeah.
Maria, you start.
There's so much. I mean, there's so much to be done.
Yeah.
It's hard to focus on one thing. I think teacher preparation, we need to work towards having teacher preparation being subsidized by the government, and that people need to be paid to learn how to teach. And as we're doing that, we need to look at the quality of our educator preparation programs and ensure that there's a basic level of prepared to teach to go into the classroom day one. Do no harm at the lowest level, and really having a strongly prepared teacher in front of every student classroom. And to do that, teacher preparation and also undergraduate needs to really focus in on mentorship and support throughout college and also in teacher preparation. So I think oftentimes we think folks that get into teacher preparation programs, you talked about the matriculation rate out of preparation programs, but really once you recruit into a program, make sure the support is there, that the mentorship is there, that the financial, and that can be financial, the social, emotional, all the aspects of support and mentorship, and creating a net of support for candidates, I think is really important. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to be redundant with anything people have said. So a few things that haven't come up so far that I can see regarding teacher ed, which would also deal with recruitment, I think. Lots of people spoke about get people into the community, get the students early on into the community, but also bring the community in. You know, the community understands the issues that are going on with their kids, with whether it be their own children or in their own schools. Somehow tap into that community. They're not going to come into a university like this, but in your research, go out and talk to teachers. I mean, this is the research is only for 114. I did almost 300 teachers altogether, teachers of color across the U.S. You've got to get out there and ask them candidly, create trust, bring those ideas back. Parents, you've got to get in parents, and you have to prepare future teachers to work with parents. Most teachers are scared shitless of parents. They do not want to deal with the stuff that parents are going to throw back. How do you prepare a teacher who has never worked in the inner city that it's okay for them to be called a motherfucker? I mean, you can't do that, right? No, you can do that. And you have to do that. You've got to realize that you can't internalize everything that a kid says to you. Things are happening in the community and in a home. They can bring that in. So parents have to be involved. The other thing is almost every teacher I spoke to, especially the Black teachers, especially the female Black teachers, wanted to help in training teachers themselves. Isn't there a way the teacher education program could provide a small stipend to veteran teachers to come in and work with the teacher education, or just come in as a guest speaker, so that you actually have people who are years of experience working in schools, talking and helping the professors or whatever with the learning process, the education process. So those are just the 4 areas I haven't heard yet that I think could add to something.
Well, also ditto, there's a lot. I have a couple of things. Actually, in this notebook, I have some needs and things that got asked from us, from our teacher fellows. Just things that they'd like to see to try to make the experience a little better. I'll get into that maybe just on the research side, but on the recruitment piece, I gotta just double down on meeting people where they are. I think, to your point, there are very few Black men on campuses like Stanford in the UC system. We have to do what we know, or go to where we know folks are. And our historically Black colleges and universities are definitely undertapped when it comes to matriculating and transferring their talent to places of service. But we have to be realistic about what it'll take to enlist that service. And I think in that recruitment piece, it got to definitely +1, deeply subsidizing, if not totally subsidizing, teacher preparation costs. I think that's the bare minimum of what we can do. Currently, the state has, I think, the Golden State Teacher Preparation Grant. It's like $20,000 if you're eligible, and there's been a massive expansion of that over the last couple of years, one-time funding from the state. And so I think also on the recruitment side, in that vein, I think we have to treat this as an ecosystem investing in these men, and not just this silo of university, teacher prep program, school district. Like, what are you paying? Like, there are many funding streams that are interested in teachers being in our schools and being and living in our communities. And so I think from a recruitment side, if you can, one, show that there's a viable financial pathway for somebody to do it. I think particularly for Black men, when it's couched in service and there was barriers are gone, the answer is yes. That's what we've seen. And from that end, also, I think this is kind of a double dip on both the research and the recruitment side. But we have had interesting conversations with men when we prepare them for coming to California and then going to their individual schools to be ready to be the only Black man in that building. And I think from a recruitment perspective, we have to be upfront about the fact that this is going to be lonely. However, we got to have your back because we're going to create and manufacture community around you. And just to kind of illustrate that point, these were the things that were asked for from our teachers. They want a consistent place to play basketball in together every week, every weekend. They wanted us to ask the Warriors to play in their practice facility. And I said, hold up. Who do you think we are? But basic, we can find that. It's super easy. Two of our fellows have had troubles in their student teaching placements right now with benefits. One of them is trying to apply to cover California. And he was like, Randy, you know, I'm kind of going through it. I don't know the difference between an HMO and PPO and, you know, all that stuff. But the biggest thing for me is I'm trying to find the cheapest plan I can get. And it came out of his mouth. Even if that means I'm not going to get the care I need. And so I think there's a baseline, again, not to go back to the finances all the time, but there's a baseline of where we can go to help these men. And they just want to know that they'll have bare bones level support. And so I think the research needs to go a little bit deeper in asking men beyond the pay, what can we offer you to say yes to this? And I think the answers will surprise us.
Round of applause for our panelists. So I'm going to ask for just 2 questions. Here's why. We're going to feed you. We're going to give you free alcohol paid for by somebody else, which I'm really happy about. So drink as much as you want and have a great conversation. The panelists will be here. We have a table set up. 2 questions. Does anybody have a burning question? I just ask you to speak loud. The ceilings are mic'd. We're streaming, so the minute you start talking, it's going to be broadcast for these 2 questions. So for this point in time, let's be careful. Or did you turn it off? It's on? Okay, so you know, let's keep it PG with the questions.
Can I make one suggestion? I'm going to do it. Don't inspire him. I always had this idea of having cards, name cards. So if you see like somebody who's working at your grocery store, who's college educated, who seems like be a really good person, you give them a card that says, you could be a teacher, something like that. Put your name on the other side and your address, a contact or a website or something like that. Hand it to the person. You could be a teacher. You could do that. Have you thought about that? You've got to get the word out. That is okay to do this.
I appreciate it. Yes. Yes, you first and then Joseph. Yes.
Hi, thank you. My name is Catherine. My question was to Dr. Seriguchi, am I saying that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Concerning the subsidized housing, how close is the housing to where they're working? Because I know commute is obviously a big factor in where you're going to work.
Yeah.
And do they get to be independent or do they have to like have a roommate? Like what are the conditions of this housing and how are you making it appealing to them?
8 people in the house?
No, they don't have 8 people in the house. Thank you for the question. And I'm really glad you asked that because a big part of what we're trying to push for too is proximity. You deserve to live and work live in the place that you're working. And it's important that students can see you outside of the schoolhouse, see you at the laundromat or Target or wherever, because it builds community. And there's this research concept that we're trying to get better, deeper with what's called funds of knowledge. And the concept is that there are multiple strands of connection you can build as an educator across commonalities that you have with your student. And so even if you are still training and learning and, not quite as sharp, not a 5 to 10 year veteran, you might be Black, you might be a male, you might like basketball, you might be from Florida. These are 4 things you can relate to and connect to your student, and housing and living in the same neighborhood creates more of those just naturally. So we don't have a mathematical formula because thankfully San Francisco also has a great public transportation system. But we try to locate them at least in the neighborhood that they're serving in. We would love the commute time to be 20 minutes or less, because one piece of feedback we got from teacher partners prior to us trying to kind of jumping into this, those that live in, you know, if you're familiar with the Bay Area, San Francisco, they work in San Francisco but live in Antioch or Fairfield or Vallejo, and have this hour-and-a-half commute each way, 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week. Extrapolate that over the year. We're like, you know, Mr. Jones, Miss Jones, what would you do with that time? The overwhelming answer was, I would spend more time with my kids and the families.
Do they get their own bedroom? That's what
So
she wants to know.
they do get their own bedroom. Yes.
Just their own bedroom or like their own space?
Well, we haven't hit the lotto, so we aren't affording studios for everybody, but we make sure that the most folks that anybody lives with are 4, and everyone has their own bedroom. Nobody shares a bedroom. They do share bathrooms. Unfortunately, San Francisco's is a special place when it comes to real estate, but we try to make it as comfortable as possible.
Our final question, Justin.
Hi, I'm Judson. I'm a PhD candidate here at the Randal School of Education. So I study charter schools, study charter school leadership in particular. And one thing I can tell you guys right now is these organizations are recruiting teachers and principals of color at a really rapid rate. They're developing their own graduate schools of education. They are doing everything they can in the name of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they are burning these people out of profession left and right. So how do you see this new stream of competition as a challenge to what we're trying to do, which is to build a profession? I think what I've heard from each one of the panelists today is that we're trying to build a profession that is being eroded. And we have forces that are actively eroding the profession in the name of DEI. So how do you meet that challenge, given all the things that we've talked about today?
I'll just speak. I know it's probably the wrong thing to say here. Teach for America, but same kind of deal. I was so down on Teach for America 20 years ago. It was like, you've got to be kidding. They're just doing exactly the stuff you're talking about. I was in Seattle at the time. Well, yeah, 25 years ago now. And because I was running an urban academy in Tacoma, and I'd worked in alternative education, I was asked if I would be willing to sponsor some of these kids. Okay, I had 6 of them to sponsor in Seattle, all people of color, 4 men and 2 women. They all lived together in one house. They did their curriculum together and everything else. They were remarkable people. I mean, really smart. They had a community. They had a mentor that met with them once a week to go over things with them. Now, out of that 6, only 3 of them went into teaching. But their whole point was, my point too, was that after being with them for so long, is that if they give 2 years of their life as a man of color in a classroom, what kind of an impact can they have? Again, not just as a future teacher getting more kids, but in general, they are making an impact on all these kids in the Seattle School District who hadn't seen a man of color. And these were all high school teachers. That was their thing. They all were like Princeton guy in physics and things like this. He was Vietnamese. I mean, amazing guys. So I changed my view about Teach for America from that, because I thought, get over this thing that they're going to leave the profession right away after 2 years. If you can bring them in for 2 years and you've got a stream going and you're doing all you can to support these people, I can't knock that. It's more than what the College of Education was doing at the UW.
I want to ask us as we close that I want to thank the committee, thank our incredible team, John Baker, Kim LaBoca Brown, and Kendra Shabomaheen for all your efforts. Round of applause for everyone.